Welcome back to English Learn Day, the place where stories help you grow, succeed, and master your English naturally. Today, we're sharing the story of a girl who was trapped in silence and darkness, but still found her voice. Her name was Helen Keller, and her journey is a lesson in hope, learning, and the power of human connection. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible? Like the world couldn't hear you, or you couldn't express what you truly feel? That's how Helen lived, for years. Helen was born in 1880, in the United States. She was a healthy baby, full of life. But when she was just 19 months old, she became very sick and lost both her hearing and her sight. Suddenly, the world became dark, quiet, confusing. Imagine that. No sound, no images, no way to understand the words around you, no way to speak, to read, or even to ask for help. Helen became frustrated. She couldn't express herself. She cried. She screamed. She hit things. Not because she was angry, but because she was alone in a world she didn't understand. Her family didn't know what to do. They loved her deeply, but she was growing wild, distant, unreachable. The doctors said there was no cure, no hope. But one day, everything changed. A woman arrived at their door. Her name was Anne Sullivan. And she didn't just see a disabled child. She saw potential. She saw a mind waiting to be unlocked. Anne Sullivan was only 20 years old when she arrived at the Keller home. She had poor vision herself and had lived much of her life in poverty. But what she had was patience, strength, and vision, not of the eyes, but of the heart. She didn't treat Helen with pity. She treated her with respect, with discipline. She believed Helen didn't need protection, she needed education. At first, Helen resisted. She didn't understand why this new woman was touching her hands, guiding her movements, saying nothing but pressing strange letters into her palm. It made no sense. But Anne kept going. Day after day, she signed words into Helen's hand: doll, cup, water. Helen memorized the movements, but still didn't understand. Until one afternoon, everything changed. Anne took Helen outside to the water pump. She placed one of Helen's hands under the flow of cold water, and with the other, she spelled water into her palm. Suddenly, something clicked. Helen froze. Then she touched the water again and repeated the word water. And in that moment, the world opened. The sounds, the feelings, the things Helen had always touched but never named, now had meaning. She ran around the yard, asking for the names of everything. Her skirt, the earth, the tree, her teacher. She couldn't hear or see, but now, for the first time, she could communicate. She had found language. She had found connection. That moment changed Helen's life. It also changed history. because one teacher believed that inside the silence, there was a voice. After the moment at the water pump, Helen was unstoppable. She wanted to know everything. Every object, every idea, every word. She learned faster than anyone expected, not with her eyes or ears, but with her fingertips, her memory, and her mind. And Sullivan became more than a teacher. She became Helen's guide, her translator, her mirror. She spelled every word, every sentence, every lesson into Helen's hand over and over, until it lived in her. Helen learned to read Braille, a system of raised dots that you feel with your fingers. She learned to write using a special board. Later, she even learned to speak by feeling the vibrations of people's voices and practicing how to move her own lips. It wasn't easy. It was never easy. But she never stopped. She studied history, literature, politics. She graduated from college, the first deaf and blind person to ever do so. She gave speeches, wrote books, taught others. She proved that communication isn't about sound, it's about connection. About patience, effort, and believing that your voice matters. Helen once said, "Blindness separates people from things. Deafness separates people from people." And yet, she found a way back. Not just to things, but to people, to meaning, to language, to life. And if you're learning English, this matters more than you think. Because sometimes we believe that fluency is only for the gifted, for the naturals. But Helen Keller reminds us, language isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. She didn't have sound. You do. She didn't have sight. You do. And still, she moved forward. For Helen Keller, words were more than just symbols. They were freedom. Before language, she was trapped. She couldn't explain her feelings, ask questions, or share her thoughts. She had no way to connect with the world or with herself. But once she learned to communicate, she discovered something powerful. I am not alone. Words gave her identity, voice, power. She could say, I love. She could ask, why? She could declare, I matter. That's what language does, not just for the deaf or blind, but for all of us. It gives shape to our thoughts. It turns silence into stories. It transforms fear into connection. Helen used her words to fight for others. She became an activist. She spoke about education, women's rights, disability, war, and justice. She traveled the world. Not to be seen, but to be heard. And not with her voice alone, but with her message. She proved that real freedom isn't about what we have, it's about what we express. And if we don't learn to express ourselves, we remain prisoners of our own silence. If you're learning English today, remember this, it's not just about sounding fluent. It's about unlocking doors, creating opportunity, finding your voice in a new language, in a new way. Maybe you're shy. Maybe you're afraid to make mistakes. Maybe you feel stuck. But every new word you learn is a key. Every phrase you practice is a brick in your new freedom. Because, like Helen, you're not just learning to speak. You're learning to say, I am here. I have something to say. And I deserve to be heard. Helen Keller's life is full of lessons, not only about courage, but about how to learn. And if you're studying English, her story has more to offer than any textbook. First, she reminds us that learning is not about conditions, it's about commitment. Helen couldn't hear or see, and yet, she learned to read, to write, to speak. Not because it was easy, but because she refused to give up. So the next time you feel like it's too hard to learn a new word, remember Helen. You have your eyes, your ears, your voice. She had only her will, and it was enough. Second, she teaches us that connection comes before perfection. Helen made many mistakes. Her speech wasn't clear at first. Her writing was slow. But she kept going. Because what mattered most wasn't sounding perfect, it was expressing something true. As an English learner, your accent is not a weakness. It's a story. Your mistakes are not failures. They're proof that you're alive, that you're reaching. Third, Helen shows us that language builds confidence. Every time she learned a new word, she grew stronger. She didn't just memorize, she understood. And with every word came more freedom, more identity, more peace. You can do the same. Start with a simple sentence. Practice one phrase a day. Touch the language with your voice, your thoughts, your hands. Let it become part of you, not just something you study, but something you live. Learning English is not a test. It's a journey. And like Helen, you're not walking alone. You're moving towards something bigger, a version of yourself that can speak, connect, and inspire. Helen Keller once said, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." But before she could say those words, she had to fight, in silence, in darkness, and with no map. She didn't just learn to speak. She learned to reach across walls, beyond fear, through limitations. And now it's your turn. You don't need perfect grammar to be powerful. You don't need a classroom to learn. You need courage to begin. You need to believe, like Helen did, that your voice matters, even if it sounds different. Every time you open your mouth to speak in English, every time you choose to study instead of scroll, every time you try again after forgetting a word, you are doing something brave. Quiet. Invisible to others. But real. Because you are building not just fluency, you are building freedom. So today, take 5 minutes. Write one sentence. Repeat one phrase. Whisper one word to yourself. Not for a grade. Not for applause. But for the future version of you that's waiting to be heard. If Helen could do it without sight or sound, then so can you, with patience, presence, and daily practice. If this story touched your heart or gave you hope, subscribe to English Learn Day, and share this video with someone who feels alone in their learning. Because no matter how quiet your voice feels today, it still has the power to change everything.